Hello again. Welcome to class number 80. Wow. Pero vamos a llegar a 8,000, ¿no? Clase 8,000. Algún día, Marta, diré, welcome to class number 8,000. ¿Todavía no has aprendido este idioma? Come on. Yeah. Dios mío. Menos mal. It's a good thing for me. Es curioso, la expresión menos mal, tan corriente en español, también tiene una equivalencia en inglés. También muy corriente. Pero it's a good thing. It's a good thing. It's a good thing. Claro, traducido, es una buena cosa. Pero es una frase hecha. Y hay que hacer la contracción por obligación por tratarse de una expresión hecha. It's a good thing. It's a good thing. Si no, si todo el mundo aprendiera rápido, pues yo no tendría un trabajo. I would lose my job. All right, Natasha, let's finish. Bueno, let's try. Intentemos terminar con nuestra amiga Natasha Zarakovich. So, you remember that she's 28. She's 28 years old. She lives with her mother and brother, etc., etc. She goes to work. She works in the Russian state laboratory that gives approval to pharmaceutical products, okay? And she goes to work at 7:30, early. She goes home at 12 o'clock to have lunch with her mother. Her father died several years ago. Es huérfana de padre. All right. Y su hermano son huérfanos de padre. All right. She works continuously. De forma continuada. She works continuously. Continuadamente, literalmente. In the lab until 12, when she goes home to have lunch with her mother. She gets back. To get es llegar. To get back es llegar de regreso, o sea, volver. Probablemente aquí sería vuelve a la 1:30, pero nosotros solemos decir llega de vuelta o de regreso. She gets back. She gets back to the lab. To get to. Llegar a is to get to. She gets back to the lab at 1:30 and continues until 4:30. Sometimes, por favor, fuérzate, oblígate. Delante de un espejo si es preciso. Sometimes, cerrando la boca en ambas M's. Porque se dice sometimes es tiempos de sol. Sometimes. Moon times. Star times. No, sometimes. Sometimes she stays past 4:30. O sea, horas extras. Sometimes she stays. El verbo to stay no es estar. Estar es to be. El verbo to stay es permanecer más allá o quedarse más allá del tiempo estipulado en este caso. Sometimes she stays. Quédate aquí después y tomemos un café. Stay here. No te vayas. Don't go. Stay. Stay just a little bit longer. Sometimes she stays past 4:30. If her boss needs her help. But usually, je sais, en francés, usually, ese sonido no existe en castellano, pero, bueno, en Sevilla creo que sí, existen los sevillanos. Los argentinos. Los sevillanos dicen chiquillo, sí. Pero los argentinos dicen, yo sé, yo fui allí ayer, usually. So usually, sometimes, ¿cómo me entretengo aquí? Sometimes she stays past 4:30 if her boss needs her help. Tercera persona singular, con la S, famosa esta. If her boss needs her help. But usually, she goes to the National Library. Wow. La Biblioteca Nacional. Library. Library no es librería. Bookshop or bookstore es librería. Biblioteca es library. La Biblioteca Nacional, okay. But usually, if her boss doesn't need her help, usually she goes to the National Library near the laboratory. Joder, qué chollo, todo muy cerca. And reads, lee, and reads until 6:30 or 7. Her house is small and noisy. Noise, escrito noise, con E al final. Noise es ruido. Si cambias la E final por una Y, noisy, ruidoso, o ruidosa, es la casa. Her house is small and noisy. Especially, ahora una E delante, especially, sobre todo, especialmente se dice en inglés, en especial, especially when her brother and his friends are there, at the home. And she prefers, Natasha, she prefers the quiet. Escrito quiet, pero no significa quieto. Quieto es still, como todavía. Estate quieto, be still. Quédate quieto, stay still. Ahora, quiet. Se pronuncia quiet. 2 sílabas, quiet. Bueno, más o menos, quiet. Sílaba y media, digamos, quiet. She prefers the quiet, like el silencio. She prefers the quiet and solitude of the library. Solitude, soledad. Solitude. Solitude no es ser persona, no sentirse uno solitario. Loneliness es la soledad que nadie quiere. Nadie quiere sentir loneliness. Quiere compañía y no sentirse siempre solo. Loneliness. Ahora, solitude es el tipo de soledad que a veces la gente busca. A mí me gusta la soledad en muchos momentos. And she prefers the quiet and solitude of the library. She always reads, always. She always reads in English because she wants to take the English state exam, the state English exam, el examen del Estado en inglés. If she passes it, pasar un examen en inglés, aquí se dice aprobar un examen. Pero aprobar, to approve en inglés es autorizar, dar aprobación. No es aprobar una asignatura. Eso es pasar, to pass. If she passes it, the exam, yes. If she passes it, she automatically receives an increase in her salary. If she passes the exam, she automatically, igual que automáticamente, receives, third person, an increase in her salary. Okay. All right. How old is Natasha? She's 28. Is she married or single? She's single. Does she live alone? No, she doesn't. Does she live with you? No, she doesn't. Does she live with me? No, she doesn't. Does she live with Marta? No, she doesn't. Who does she live with? Preposición al final. ¿Quién vive ella con? O sea, ¿con quién vive ella? Who does she live with? Who does she live with? She lives with her mother and brother. Oh. But does she live in Russia? Yes, she does. Where does she live in Russia? She lives in Moscow. Does she live in a big house? No, she doesn't. Does she live in a small apartment? Yes, she does. And does she work? Yes, she does. What does she do? What does she do? ¿Cómo? What does she do? ¿Qué? What does she? ¿A qué se dedica? Yes. ¿Qué hace? Literalmente. Pero así, para decir ¿a qué te dedicas? Es what do you do? What do you do? Hola, Rafa. Por cierto, Rafa. Hi, Rafa. Hi. Tell me, what do you do? Esa expresión es ¿a qué te dedicas? Profesionalmente. What do I do? What does she do? She's a chemist. She's a chemist. Does she work in the private sector? Does she work in the private sector? No, she doesn't. She doesn't work in the private sector. Does she work in the public sector? Yes, she does. Where does she work in the public sector? She works in the Russian State Laboratory. How do you say laboratory in British English? Excuse me? How do you say laboratory in British English? Intento adoptar un acento británico. Tengo que empezar, tengo que hablar de lado para hablar con un británico. Laboratory. The laboratory, estoy exagerando, porque me caen muy bien los ingleses. La pérfida Albion. Yes, laboratory. Laboratory, y los dos decimos lab en su forma corta. So, she works in the Russian State Laboratory. Well, what does the laboratory do? Excuse me. What does, verbo auxiliar, ahora voy a decir el sustantivo, un sustantivo largo. Escucha. What does the Russian State Laboratory do? Así es el inglés. ¿A qué se dedica el laboratorio estatal ruso? ¿Qué hace? O sea, ¿qué hace? What does the Russian State Laboratory do? Ahora bien, si quiero ser barroco con esto y realmente podría poner un sujeto larguísimo. ¿Qué hace el laboratorio donde fuimos ayer para visitar? Hace. What does the laboratory where we went yesterday, remember, do? O sea, están el verbo auxiliar y el verbo principal alejadísimos el uno del otro. Pero vamos, no voy a enseñar inglés de esa forma. What does she do? What does the Russian State Laboratory do? Ahora repito, el concepto del verbo auxiliar penetró en el inglés hace 600, 700 años. No sé por qué. Sin embargo, está ahí. What do you do? Where do you live? Where does? Y es do en el presente en todas las personas menos él, ella, ellos. Third person singular. ¿Cuándo llueve aquí? When does it rain? Does it rain every day? No, it doesn't. Does it rain only on Saturday in this city? No, it doesn't. Well, when does it rain? It rains from time to time. De vez en cuando. Yes, it rains de cuando en cuando, from time to time. It rains. But does it rain every week? No, it doesn't. Well, sometimes. Does it rain only at night? No, it doesn't rain only at night. Well, does it rain only in the morning? No. Well, in Florida? Yeah, in Florida. Does it rain only in the afternoon? In the summertime. Más o menos, casi, sí, casi, almost, yes. Es semi-tropical, and every afternoon, for 2 hours, and then, huele de maravilla, despejado todo. All right. But what does the laboratory do? The laboratory analyzes pharmaceutical products, pharmaceutical drugs, and gives approval. Well, what kind of drugs? Drugs that are produced, drugs that Russian laboratories produce, or drugs that foreign companies want to sell, que quieren vender. Productos que quieren vender, that they want to sell in Russia. All right. Yes. Does Natasha walk to work? No, she doesn't. Does she drive to work? No, she doesn't. Does she fly to work, como Peter Pan, like Peter Pan or Superman? No, she doesn't. Well, does she go to work by bus? No, she doesn't. Does she go to work by private jet? No, she doesn't. Does she go to work by helicopter? No, she doesn't. Does she? Well, how does she? How does she go? How does she go to work? Pues estoy diciéndolo 1000 veces para que se te haga, para que estas estructuras se te hagan amigas, muy familiares. How does she go to work? She goes to work on the subway or on the underground. But does she live? Does she live far from the laboratory? No, she doesn't. Well, how far does she live? How far does she live from the laboratory? She lives 3 subway stops from the laboratory. She lives 3 underground stops, paradas, stops, from the laboratory. She lives 3 metro stops from the laboratory. Okay, what time does she go to work? Excuse me? What time does she? What time does she? What time does she go to work? She goes to work at 7:30. Okay. Does she work all day in the laboratory? No, she doesn't. What time does she stop? She stops at 12 o'clock. 12. Why does she stop at 12? Why does she? Why? Why does she? ¿Y por qué? Why does she? Why does she? Why does she stop at 12 o'clock? She stops. She stops at 12 o'clock because she has lunch. She has lunch at 12 o'clock. Really? Does she really have lunch at 12 o'clock? No. Really, no. She doesn't have lunch at 12 o'clock. Well, why does she stop at 12 o'clock if she doesn't have lunch at 12 o'clock? Because she stops at 12 o'clock because she goes home for lunch. She goes home. It's 15 minutes. So she has lunch at 12:15. Okay? Are you happy now? Yes, all right. But does she have lunch alone? No, she doesn't. Who does she have lunch with? Who does she have? To have lunch is almorzar o comer, la comida del mediodía. To have lunch. To eat is comer. Ya sea cena, desayuno, comer o comer un bocadillo. To eat. Escrito eat, eat. Ahora bien, to have lunch is comer la comida del mediodía, almorzar. Who does she have lunch with? ¿Quién almuerza ella con? En inglés. ¿Con quién almuerza? Who does she have lunch with? Who does she? Does she? Recuerda que she, la SH, she, es un sonido fonético duro en inglés. Invade y come la S de does, casi por completo. Who does she have lunch with? She has lunch with her mother. Oh. And does she stay home or stay at home the rest of the day? No, she doesn't. Does she go back to work? Yes, she does. She goes back to work. What time does she get back to the office, to the lab? What time does she get back to the lab? She gets back at 1:30. Oh, okay, from 12 to 1:30. So she has an hour and a half break. Yes, she has an hour and a half break. Aquí uso la expresión hora y media como adjetivo para describir el tipo de break, el tipo de descanso. ¿Qué tipo de descanso? Un descanso de hora y media. An hour and a half break. From 12, from 2. Cuando es un tiempo cerrado con un principio y fin, siempre es from 2. Si hay un comienzo, pero el fin sigue vigente, el transcurso del tiempo, no decimos from, decimos since, escrito since. Vivo en España desde el año 74. I've been living in Spain since 1974. Ahora sí, ayer hubiera vuelto a mi país de origen, diría from 1974 to yesterday. All right, that's it, from to. So, Natasha has lunch from 12, or has a lunch break from 12 to 1:30. And she gets back to the office at 1:30. Okay, good. And does she continue working? Yes, she does. What time does she finish? She finishes. What time does she finish? Does lleva la S de nuestra famosa tercera persona del plural, del singular. Does. Por eso el verbo va en su sentido casi infinitivo. What time does she finish? What time do you finish? What time do I finish? What time do they finish? Do. What time does she finish? Ahora la respuesta, si es afirmativa, la S. She finishes. She finishes. Se añado una sílaba aquí. Finish, finishes. Porque termina en SH. Finish exige una sílaba más para rematar bien la tercera persona del singular. She finishes at 4:30. Does she go home at 4:30? No, she doesn't. What does she do? What does she do at 4:30? It depends. It depends? Yeah, it depends. Depende. Yeah, it depends. Well, what does it depend on? Depend on. What does it depend on? Well, sometimes her boss needs her help. Ayuda, socorro. Sometimes her boss needs her help. And in these cases, she stays in the laboratory after 4:30. But usually, her boss doesn't need her help. And in these cases, she doesn't go home. She goes to the National Library, la Biblioteca Nacional. How far is it from the laboratory to the National Library? I don't know, but it's near. The library is near the lab. The National Library is near the lab. But what does she do? At the library. Claro, aquí dicho at the library porque va a la biblioteca por un motivo. Si se despertara de un sueño y está dentro de esa biblioteca, diría, ¿qué hago yo en? Why am I in the National Laboratory? The National Library. Claro, pero si yendo por un motivo, se suele decir at, aunque in es correcto. What does she do at the library? What does she do in the library? Entonces, no te obsesiones con in y at. Pero yo voy a explicar la diferencia cada vez, pero voy a recalcar que son intercambiables en el análisis final. They are interchangeable. What does she do at the laboratory? She reads. She reads, claro. At the library, he dicho laboratory otra vez. Library, she reads. Lógico, it's logical. It's logical. So it's the library, she reads. Well, what does she read? She reads novels. Novelas otra vez. Well, what kind of novels does she read? She reads novels in English. And why does she read novels in English? Because she wants to improve her English. And why does she want to improve her English? Because she wants to take the state exam, the Russian state English exam. And why does she want to take the exam? Because if she passes, third person, I pass, you pass, she passes. Yo apruebo el examen, tú apruebas, ella aprueba. I pass the exam, you pass the exam, she passes. Si ella pasa el examen, si aprueba, if she passes the exam, she automatically receives a salary increase. Eso lo dice aquí, ¿eh? No es mío, no lo he inventado yo. I didn't make this up. She automatically receives an increase in her salary. Y en tu libro dice lo mismo. Si no lo tienes, hazte con estos libros, ¿eh? Son buenísimos. Voy despacio, un poco pesado. Soy un profe un poco pesado. Pero quiero que eches raíces profundas con el inglés. La gente muchas veces a salto de mata van aprendiendo, entonces hablan un inglés roto, decimos en inglés, broken English. Aquí se suele decir macarrónico. Yeah. Entonces nunca tienen. Y la gramática básica acaba siendo un enemigo que enreda a cada paso. Como si fueras por una jungla, la zona más densa de la jungla amazónica sin machete. Entonces te enreda. en la fluidez del caminar. Y no quiero que te enredes con la gramática inglesa al caminar. Quiero fluidez y que la gramática te oriente y te articule el speech, o sea, el hablar. Entonces, que sea aliado y no enemigo. Entonces, por eso soy pesado con works, etc. Does, what time does she, para que te familiarices tanto con ello que ya es casi un sexto sentido. Hay que repetir las acciones una y otra vez para ser maestro de dichas acciones. Igual que Leo Messi o Cristiano con los ejercicios de dominio de balón, Rafa Nadal con el revés y el derecho, o la derecha, practicando una y otra vez, 1000 veces al día. Entonces uno sí llega a un dominio, pero exige humildad y trabajo. All right. El sermón acabó. See you tomorrow.